Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Now, if you've tuned in before, first off, thank you. And secondly, you know how much I love to talk to people who work in the Canadian country music radio business. With me today is a gentleman who's been in that business for over 25 years, very successful as the program director and music director of Cool 100.1 FM and 95.5 Hits FM. Is that still the title?
That's the
Hasn't
one.
changed?
Why? What have you heard?
You never know in these volatile days, right? I'm
Yeah,
hoping that
right
you
you
would have
are.
gone up. That's right, a promotion of some sort. But Paul Ferguson is with me today, and it's a pleasure to have you on, my friend.
I really appreciate this, Jim. Thanks. And you've been doing this podcast now, and you will know certainly better than me, since the onset of the pandemic, no?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I started it in July of last year,
Okay.
so took a little time to get prepared, got it set up, and we'll continue to roll with it. It's been really great for artists to get some perspective on things. Some industry people have really enjoyed it, so yeah, it's been fun, and it's great for me to get an opportunity to talk to people like yourself in a forum like this because it's not often that you're the one who gets interviewed.
No, it really isn't. And it's a bizarre situation to be in. Normally, I'm the guy pumping questions, but I think it's pretty impressive, and it's been neat to see the variety and the cross section of folks from different sectors of the business that you pulled in on this. How many is this, number 60? It's got to be close to 60, if not over.
No, this will be, by the time it airs, I think this will be episode 50. So yeah, we're just dropping one a week, and we're going to continue on that for a while. And yeah, so thank you for saying that. It's been a blast. And one of the reasons I love to talk to radio people is because I think you guys are really on the front lines as it pertains to fan engagement. And I've often talked about how radio is essentially like the marketing arm of our industry. And because you're on the front lines, you can not only update us on trends in the format, but you can help us anticipate what might be coming next. What are some of the most exciting trends you have seen in country music over the past 5 years?
What I love seeing is a bit of a pullback to the center of country. Um, and I say that with a bit of condition, meaning I'm not a judgy person when it comes to a particular trend because I'm able to put what I might work out to aside from what's good for business. And so I consider myself a fan of what's good for business, when I have my radio hat on. So when I say I love seeing a pullback to the center of country, it's in no way meant to be disparaging to maybe what the trend that's replacing was. So, and in fact, I liken it to walking into a restaurant. I like to see variety on a menu. That's going to keep me coming back to the restaurant. I want my radio station to kind of sound like that restaurant menu looks. I want a variety of sounds on the station. And so, as much as I love to see kind of that, return to the center of country with some of its artists and the texture of the songs, I like when somebody tunes in that they're not necessarily getting pigeonholed to any particular sound.
Yeah, there's something to be said for diversity being strength as it pertains to music. And I certainly think there are trends in music that follow trends in fashion. I mean, trends come and go. In music right now, what we're seeing as you talk a bit more to coming back to the center of country music, I would assume you're talking about the trends of the Ashley McBrides and Chris Stapletons getting a bit more singer-songwriter and a little more depth back into the format. Is that what you're referring to?
Sure. Yeah. That's precisely it, and it's not to suggest that it was entirely absent, prior to this most recent pullback, but absolutely not every artist, even visually, is cookie cutter, and I just think that's so great. You know, it feels like we're accepting of a wider variety visually and sonically as well. So yeah, absolutely. The idea of a really great song cutting through. Again, it's not new, but I love to see it happen more and more.
I feel like we've almost taken pop country as far as it can go and still call it country. I mean, I know that that's subjective, and again, I'm not here to denigrate it either because I think it's got its place. I do enjoy some FGL and some Sam Hunt and some Kane Brown, But I think that the dynamic of adding more singer-songwriters into it strengthens the format, gives it more diversity. And then another interesting trend we're seeing as of late, which is a trend that isn't necessarily new to the format, but the Roadhammers and Corey Marks have been on the forefront of sort
Right.
of integrating rock back into country, which is something that you could credit, back to as early as the 1980s and pioneers on that forefront, like Steve Earle, who had these songs like Copperhead Road, which could get airplay on country and rock radio simultaneously. It's an interesting trend. Do you see that is going to continue to grow and blossom?
I sure hope so because I love everything you said, and I think it, very much dovetails with that. And yeah, I love living in a world where the Roadhammers have new music out and and a new album coming. Because again, it speaks to that variety on the menu, right? If I want pizza, I'll go to a pizza shop all the time. But you know what? If I want some variety, well, I'm going to go to that restaurant that offers that. So when we get artists, with a variety of textures in their music, step into the plate, I love that, and I do see that happening more. I think it's awesome.
How do we continue to integrate and involve some of the artists who arguably have cooled in terms of their perception at radio, or at least in terms of the industry, but still have a lot of legs with fans? You have had many conversations about George Canyon, full
Yep.
disclosure, right? I managed George. I worked with George for years. George had his heyday in radio in the early 2000s. How does a guy like that continue to work to get the attention of people like yourself in this business and continue to make a case to potentially get airplay in this highly competitive landscape that we're all navigating?
You could probably ask everybody at radio the same question, and you may get a different answer from everybody. So I'll take my crack at it. In a case like George, if you don't mind me using the example you brought up, I would like to think that we still live in a world where we can put our hand to a certain degree. I know, it's easier said than done. Put our hand over the label and let's judge the music. And again, that's very simplified and easier said than done because you also we have these 3-minute increments of time on the radio. That's our inventory, and we have to spend it very wisely. So we want to continue to tell artists stories. That said, why not continue to tell the story of a George Canyon or another tenured artist? In fact, you'll remember as well as I do. I think it was 2016 when there are a couple of artists, George included, were kind of back with a couple of hits again. And I'm sure it was 2016. And so it can be done. It has been done. If the music's there, I would like to think at radio we can still listen to the song for what it is, and just give them a chance. Really, all you can ask is that radio programmers and music director bring it into the meeting, give it a chance.
Listen, it's not an issue that is isolated to the Canadian country music industry. This has been happening in the United States as well. Alan Jackson can still sell out arenas, no problem, but the guy has a hard time getting attention or radio airplay. George Strait has even crossed the
Mhm.
the Rubicon now on that front, right? So I think that it's interesting. We are striving for inclusivity in this business, but what I'm trying to get to is if there's any unconscious bias now, it feels like it could be ageism, and not necessarily ageism, but you've been in the business for long enough for us to have potentially lost interest or lost as much interest as we had. And so how do we come back from that? You say it's judging it on the song itself, but what about other things that might be at play with that artist? If they're putting together a great album and they can preview components from that, what else can an artist do to substantiate their case if he or she is a bit past their prime in terms of industry speak, but still very relevant with fans?
Well, I mean, we country, well, I believe it achieves across lots of demographics. We target a young audience. And so, the best that an artist can do to stay as relevant on the platforms where that audience lives, you know, and that takes work at their end, that to understand what's the content that's going to be relevant to those folks, like, you know, uh, and try to reach that audience where they live. It's not impossible. And I don't believe an artist should try to pretend they're something they're not. You know what I mean? But try to reach that audience on the platform they live. Be relevant to them. And is it the smoking gun? I don't know about that, but I think it's a shot to take. In terms of staying relevant to that audience that's filling in behind when they were in their prime.
Let's talk emerging artists for a minute. What do you think emerging artists do right to present a compelling case to get the attention of people like yourself in the industry?
Boy, this is a great question, and I love it and I appreciate it because I've always um, pulled for the emergings, and I do that based on a mentality. And when I say pull for, I say that because I don't know who in 5, 7 years the next generation of stars are going to be. Everybody in the format at one point in time was an emerging artist. So if I had a crystal ball, awesome. I don't. So that's why I will give any and all time I can to emerging artists. Um, and because it's good for business. I want my business to be healthy down the road, which means I want to pay attention to who those artists are who are going to fill in next, right? So what can they do? A um, don't at any point in the process shortchange your product, because as an emerging artist, you don't have to be as good as the incumbents. You got to be better because they're the incumbent. We've invested a lot of those 3-minute pieces of inventory I described earlier. Um, so you have to unseed those folks. So um, no level of work, of what you can put in it, is too much to get. And you've got to be honest with yourself. And you have to surround yourself with people who are going to be honest with you. And if you, frankly, listen to whether it's country radio, whether it's your streaming platform, and have people and yourself who are going to be honest enough to say, does my song belong between the two songs I just heard? And if the answer is no, then you got to go back and you got to work a little harder.
Yeah, that's a great point. Everything else in this business is a moot point until you have a hit song. It's something we talk about on the agency and management front all the time with artists. It's like, listen, you can work on your socials, ramp up your TikTok, all of that stuff matters, play some live shows. But really, if you want people to give a shit, you got to have a hit. Like that
That's it.
is what you need. That's paramount. And I think it's a really good point that you mentioned that, you not only need to have a hit, you need to put your best foot forward, but you need to displace a sitting champion, for lack of a better term, right? Somebody else who's already got the ear of radio has built their equity to a point where their singles are getting added out of the gate. And then you brought up another point, which is making sure that in a business which is emotionally driven and subjective, that somehow you keep delusion at bay. And
Right.
that's a tough one, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had artists send me product that's amazing, but I've also had artists send me product that's completely subpar. And in their ears, it's as good as Keith Urban or Carrie Underwood, right? Like, that's a tough nut to crack, man. I think the
Well, it
key
really
is
is.
what you suggested. You got to surround yourself with people and you got to take their feedback, people who tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear.
To that point, I had a Zoom chat the other day with Aaron Goodman, got a new song out there, and his wife is in the business as well, and in the music publishing side. So you talk about family members who could be in a situation where it's difficult, to give your honest feedback. How about having to hear it from your spouse? That, hey, listen, I love you, man, but this song may not be good enough. And oh, by the way, what do you want for dinner later? Like, it's not easy to do, right? And so that's why you really have to surround yourself with people who are going to be honest. And you also have to be prepared to take that. And and not take it personally, not take it, it's not a criticism of you. Everybody's got your best interests in mind. So toughen up the skin a little bit. Everybody's working towards the common goal in your camp. And if people can be honest and you give them permission to be honest with you, then you're getting somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's so difficult to find that balance on a team because in this very strange way, you are shepherding the career of an artist and you are working on their behalf, but ultimately at the end of the day, you work for them. And sometimes, in order to do the best for them, you have to go against the grain as to what their immediate or short term goals or wishes might be, because it's like, hey, listen, I need you to think about this too. It's tough to develop that rapport. But as I get older, luckily, it's developing faster and faster. So you also sit on the Canadian Country Music Board,
Right.
and you've been on the board now for how many years?
Uh, I will have completed 5 come this fall.
Okay, Canadian Country Music Association, I should say. So 5 years on the board. Ratings are slipping for television shows. This isn't unique just to the CCMA. We're seeing this at the ACM, the CMAs, the Grammys, the Golden Globes. They're all slipping. What's the problem? Why are we losing audiences? And we'll get into, is there any way that we can win them back? But what do you think the issue is right now with award shows and their erosion of relevancy?
These are just my thoughts as a consumer, as much as anything else. And I always try to see things. You and I, in a bit of a pre-podcast huddle, we were talking about the idea of accepting the fact that guess what, you might not be the smartest person in the room, and that the feedback of others is important. And so my daughter, who's 17, does she? And I also have to look at it through the lens of she knows her father's in the business, so even she's a bit biased, right? She cares more than typical because I'm in the game. Anyway, does my 17-year-old daughter care? What does she care about? What would draw her to a program? Is it the award, or do they want to see their favorite artists do cool things? Whether it's performing on a stage, whether it's a glimpse into who they are, you know and I think that's a question that we really got to look at. And I say we as the greater industry, because as you say, all award shows are suffering from this. um and are we speaking to these folks where they are, right? I mean, because,
Are you talking about social justice, or what are you talking about?
well, what I guess, are we reaching them on the platform they live? It
Okay,
not even so
you're
much
talking
social
platform.
justice is, like if I want to shoot a water balloon that way, I should aim over there, right? Because all the people
Yeah.
are over there. And so, do we, do we need to be forward leaning in terms of how we present this to the consumer?
Yeah, it's interesting. The platform, I think, is important. You and I talked about the previous broadcast relationship with the Canadian Country Music Association, which was with the CBC, and a valued and cherished relationship for a long time, but not quite the audience we were gunning for. Not quite the lead in. I believe when I was on the board, the lead in was Jeopardy, and it's like that's not exactly the hottest, new, most relevant show. Although my kids happen to like it, but um, it's one of those things where you have to make those decisions, like you said, to try to find people where they are. But philosophically as well, I think one of the reasons the Oscars has suffered so much and some of the other award shows is they've gotten very preachy. And I do understand and appreciate that the arts are on the vanguard of culture, and that the arts and the responsibility of the arts is to continue to push that line forward to evolve humanity and involve the conscientious thought of humanity to a degree. But it can become somewhat hypocritical. It can become something that consumers just don't appreciate or enjoy. And then you've got to sit back and ask yourself, what's our responsibility to evolve humanity, if that's where we're coming from, and is that somewhat is that a bit of an arrogant stance to take? And then are we forcing people to tune out because we're preaching at them about values rather than giving them entertainment? It's an interesting quandary to navigate.
Boy, is it ever. And it's, yeah, you really got to chew on that because, oftentimes, and I'm generalizing here, I can't quantify how often, but, sometimes the day after an awards show, what is it people are talking about? And so, if a relevant message, powerful message is delivered in a meaningful way, and I think maybe that's a part of it too, in a meaningful way, sometimes that's the moment that gets talked about, you
Yeah.
know? But that's a very fine line. You're right between, okay, um, I don't want to be preached at all night. If you can give me the entertainment that I came over here for, and you can also give me some food for thought because they have the platform to do it. And again, I'm speaking about celebrities in general, and award shows in general. Um, I think there's a place for all of it, but it is a very careful balance.
What did you think of Ricky Gervais' opening monologue at the 2019 Golden Globes, where he basically got up there and said, thank your God, your agent, and then f off, and do not come up here and preach to the audience because you're in no position. You don't live in the real world. I mean, I'm paraphrasing,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
but um, I actually thought I'm curious to get your thoughts on it first. So go ahead.
I'll say this, you know, and I think many people who and thank everybody who's still watching us at this point. Appreciate your time, not taken for granted. But those who are watching, who know me, know that I'm not easily offended. The list of things I really take seriously in life is not very long. So when I hear a guy like Ricky Gervais say something like that, open up a show like that, I go, wow, let's see if they bring him back next year, right? Um, and I'm okay with somebody getting up there and delivering that. And I would like to think a lot of those celebrities in the crowd are like-minded to him in the sense that, hey, we're people who have achieved at a very high level. We've worked hard. We've been, lucky along the way, and everything's worked out. And yeah, maybe I shouldn't take myself so seriously and you know, as though everyone is hanging on everything I say.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for a poignant, powerful message that's delivered with authenticity, and that can be a showstopper, and it can be beautiful. But there are, several examples of celebrities getting up and rattling off about, you know, women in the business and oppression, and then thanking Harvey Weinstein. Obviously back before all the
Yeah.
the shit hit the fan with him, right? So there's this hypocrisy element to it that often gets played up. That, and again, I'm agnostic on this. I'm not saying that there isn't a place for social justice on these shows, but at what point do we start to go, wait a minute, are we chasing off our audience by making them all feel like they are culpable for something they have no hand in? Or is this the opportunity to give them an escape from what they see on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all day and they're sick of? And can we play into that a little bit and take their mind off hot button issues of the day? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I
No,
think it's important to debate it. And
I agree.
a lot of people will want to. Well, we need to talk about social justice because they want to look around and make sure everybody's watching and show everyone how virtuous and moral of a person they are. But the reality is, if no one's watching the show, your message isn't going to resonate anyway. So that's kind of where I come back to, like, the practicality of it. Like, how do we balance those things? Make sure we're putting out a great show that's a great product, that's riveting, compelling. People tune in for it, and maybe we have some really poignant, powerful messages throughout that show that resonate with people. But I've often found the best way to do that with art is through the art itself and not necessarily the accepted speech. If you want to
Well said.
move someone's soul, uh, do it with a song like Mickey Guyton. What are you going to tell her?
Oh,
Don't get up there and talk about, you know, how oppressed you are if you're an actress making 20 million a picture, because it's not going to sit well with people,
No,
right?
no.
But there are moments for that, and I do think that art is the best way to translate that emotion.
I guess too, um, if somebody can deliver the message and rather than me feel like I've been yelled at, I feel inspired, now you've done something.
Martin Luther King,
Right.
the master, right?
I'm so glad
It
you brought up
wasn't
that Vicki Guyton song too, by the way.
Yeah, such a great song. And the duet she has with Dean Brody, Boys, which went number one in Canada, her first ever number one. Super excited about that. Thanks for the part you played in that, by the way. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to navigate. It's an interesting thing for those of us in the industry to talk about and make sure that we're erring on the side of caution, because ultimately, like I say, at the end of the day, if nobody's watching, your message isn't going to get to anyone. So how do we find an effective way to communicate it without making people feel like they're being, uh, you know, accused of something or yelled at, like you said, right? That's a key point.
If I
We'll
can go
figure it out at some point.
yeah, and again, if we can go away inspired, that's totally different. It's like you can give 2 people the exact same speech. People are gonna follow whoever delivered it better.
It's true. Yeah. Speaking of which, you're a very adept public speaker. Obviously, you were drawn to that. What was it that made you want to get into radio? Was it the fact that you were always kind of a bit of uh, a class clown, or a guy who knew what to do with attention? What type of kid were you growing up, and why did radio draw you in?
Wow, you've been talking to my high school librarian, haven't you? Um, it's, I was that guy, right? I've like I say, the list of things in life that I take very seriously is not very long. I'm upright, my family's upright, I have a job to come to, I'm good. Everything else is details. So, and I've
Is
always
that part of your personality, or is that a coping mechanism, do you think? Like, if you're really honest with yourself, is that something you developed to deal with something else, or is that something that was just intrinsic to you from the day you were born?
I think, and that's a fair question. I think that is something that's just in the way I've been wired, where, um, and it's probably, a lot to do with the way I was the youngest of 7 children. I am the youngest of 7 children. I'm not gaining on them. And so, when you have a lot of brothers and sisters and a mom and dad whose attention needs to go to everybody, you learn, I think, you have no other choice but to be satisfied, right? And my mother and my father, don't get me wrong, um, they were very good at nobody necessarily feeling like they held a place one of the others did. And so, to your question, I think that's just in the way I was always like, it has taken very little to keep me satisfied as a result. Because when you're in a household of 9 people, that guess what? It ain't raining gifts at Christmas, right? Because there's a lot of people here. And so,
Did
we
they encourage that in you, to be outspoken, to be the life of the party?
no,
Um, no, they didn't
no, no,
encourage it.
no. My mother's a retired teacher. So, no, she didn't, Jim. I
Well,
got
it still came through.
yeah, well, it showed up. And so I've always, always, always enjoyed having fun. And that does go back, you go back in school. But being the son of a teacher, I, I was never a problem child in class to where I was an issue for the teacher to deal with. I say never, everybody has their moment. But I wasn't the kid that got thrown out in the hall all the time, everything else. So, and I think that's what helped me knowing my mom taught me grade 2. So, there was no lecture she could give me in class that was going to be as bad as the one I got on the way home. So that taught me the time and place type of rule, right? And out in the schoolyard, be that guy. When it's time to blow off steam. When we're back in the classroom, it's probably time to turn the dimmer switch down. But to fast forward to and through high school, I just I've always loved people, and I attribute that to coming out of a large family as well. And so, being a very social being, I think lends to that. I just want to make sure everybody feels good and everybody's having a good time. And so, and I love that feeling. I really love being around people.
Did
So,
you ever choose the right profession?
well, I really feel lucky that I've been able to do what I've done so long. But did it draw me to radio? I'm not sure. Um, I've been a lifelong sports fan. I've been a lifelong Blue Jay fan. And I knew at a young age, I can't throw a slider, but I could probably do what that guy on TV is doing. And, I tried for the slider, don't get me wrong. But, I was always more in sync and more in tune with that guy on TV. And more so when I went to my first Blue Jay game, who is that guy introducing the players? I want to be that guy. And so that's kind of what pulled me down this path. And I think I applied logic as well because in addition to being a bit of a nut bar, I'm also a fairly analytical guy, and I realized the sports broadcasting business, you know, is probably a more narrow lane than radio in general. And so when I enlisted at Loyalist College a million years ago, I took the radio broadcast program and always figured if I want to do something, branch into something different, I'll have that opportunity, but let me get the most broad base of skills at school.
Good idea. And it's interesting how your propensity for self awareness brought you along and evolved you, right? Because if you were a completely delusional human being, you'd still be out there trying to throw that slider, even at
Oh, I
this
did.
age, right? I'll
Yeah,
get on that team at some point,
right.
but you were able to dial into that early enough to go, well, I can still be close to what I love, but I can be close to it in this particular aspect. And then, realizing at that point, like, yeah, I had a similar journey when I was a kid. I loved boxing, and I would watch HBO, and I'd see Jim Lampley and any of the color commentators, and I'd go, if I can't be Mike Tyson, it'd be cool to be that guy. But then you start to realize Jim Lampley's been doing this for like 30 to 40 years, and he's not probably going anywhere anytime soon. And there's only a very few amount of jobs in proportion to the amount of people who are
Right.
available. And then and then you broaden your scope a little further, and like you did, you end up in radio. So has music always been something that's really moved you, and country music in particular, or has that been something that you've grown an acquired taste for?
It was always there through mom and dad, but again, being in a large family, I was exposed to a lot of different music stylings by way of my older brothers and sisters and their music tastes. So country came through mom and dad. When I was young, I was kind of parked right in the middle. Um, was not a big fan of like, I got exposed to Fleetwood Mac and Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band and Bob Seger and these folks at a very young age. I was a younger fan of acts like that than probably the typical core fan of those artists. And as it pertains to country, we would some of my most fond memories when I was young would be the Sunday drives. It sounds like a country song in and of itself. We few of us, some were, brothers and sisters old enough to be off doing their own thing. The rest of us would pile in the car and in would go the Don Williams cassette. And just such warm memories for me. Whenever I hear a Don Williams song in particular, I'm back in that car that was really too small to have that many of us in it.
What's your
And
favorite Don Williams song? You a Tulsa Time guy, or do you like more the ballads?
give me that ballad, I believe in you.
Mm, great track.
I came across that song one time on Stingray's television music channel there one day entirely by accident. And it was just such a great little find. I just was bouncing around on the guide, hit that particular channel, and there was the Don Williams song, and I was some happy to sit and take in that.
If you get a chance, try to find the version of Fever, the old Peggy Lee song that Don
Cool.
Williams covered. He does just a stupendous version of that song. It's almost as good as Johnny Cash covering Nine Inch Nails with
Oh,
Hurt. It's so good. He does that song such justice, and I'm not a huge fan of covers, but when someone can interpret them to that degree, it's pretty incredible. So you'll enjoy that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about, since you work as a music director and a program director, one of the well, first off, I want to give you credit because the Canadian radio industry woke up, I would say about 5 years ago, and started understanding that if they were going to be a stakeholder in the Canadian country music business, it behooved them to promote more Canadian artists to get to number one on the radio airplay charts. And since then, we've seen a cavalcade of artists and songs go to number one. And I really credit the newest generation of music directors and program directors, such as yourself, for that evolution. But we still have to work through a few things. We still have quite a rotation disparity in some markets, not all markets, but some of them, between Canadian and American power rotations. So, Luke Combs hits a certain level of spins that a Dallas Smith or a Brett Kissel just can't, and therefore more American number ones, and we're still getting some Canadian number ones, and it's better than it used to be. But we need to potentially improve if we really want to be more equitable and promote Canadians even more so. What are your thoughts on the discrepancies, first off? And then do you see at some point the power Canadian, power American thing just going away, or is it here to stay?
Wow, that I love this conversation. Thank you, by the way, for the kind words. And if I can give you the quick backstory on what changed my thinking on a dime. I think it was around 2009. Johnny Reed was out on tour, and he sold out the Empire Theater here in Belleville in no time, to where they added a second show, and I went to both. And so I was watching the crowd. Whenever I go to a show, I really like to watch the crowd and see how they're taking in what they're taking in. And this crowd, not just for Johnny, but that was kind of the one where I went, wait a minute, we at radio might have this not absolutely perfect. That crowd didn't care that night. Everybody aged 8 to 80 in the crowd was going out of its mind. They didn't care where Johnny was from. Neither does the person driving by my station right now. They don't care. And here's
Although, based on his accent, they knew he was not from Alabama. They
no,
did know
that's
that.
right. And I got to tell you, I would be remiss if I didn't credit Jason McCoy for the impression of Johnny Reed that he's capable of doing. It is amazing. But anyway, so I got thinking, now hang on here. These people aren't exactly putting borders on their music. Why am I? And in fact, if I have access to Johnny Reed, I have access to Dallas Smith, I have access to Brett Kissel, I have access to Megan Patrick. So, and remember, I mean, I love what's good for business. So why wouldn't I invest in these guys? Because there's a better chance that I'm going to be able to put my audience in front of those artists I just named than I'm going to be some of the international acts. And we're the ones putting borders on our music. So for me, that's what kind of woke me up to the fact that, and again, it's not like I'm Santa Claus with a big bag of gifts here when it comes to a few extra spins to help to get to one. I see it as an investment in everyone's business, including mine. If these folks are bigger stars that I can put in front of my audience on a more regular basis, everybody wins. So, as for the actual rotation thing, I think I got a lot of thoughts on this, and I think we could get there someday. I think it's a bit of a romantic idea to think that the international power category and the Canadian powers become entirely equitable. I'd love to see it happen.
What purpose does it serve?
To not have it that way?
Yeah, to have it the way it is right now.
Okay, I think this is where radio trips on its feet sometimes. And again, radio folks watching this, and I'm not here to suggest they're wrong, this is just my opinion. We take a look at these CanCon regulations as though it's a sentence handed down from the principal. you're going to stay after school and you're going to play 35% CanCon. Like that's, and that's a long standing radio view. So we look at that 35% as our punishment in a sense, and I'm generalizing here. It's just my opinion, as I said. When really to get that, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. To get, an artist to a higher potential, like, a higher chart position, it only takes a few spin, a little bit from everybody helps in such a long way. It helps it go a long way. But so we see the 35% as what we have to do. And it's just always been that way. It's a long-standing, I think, radio mentality.
Yeah, I think it was January of 1971. Stan Cleese helped usher in, along with the CRTC, Canadian content. It was 30%. Thank God for that in some respects, because it built a Canadian industry. Without that, Canadian radio stations would have continued to play British invasion bands and US based artists. It built an ecosystem and an infrastructure in Canada. So I'm grateful for it. But I think where it does us a disservice to some degree is once you hit the level of a Brett Kissel or a Dean Brody, or the Rec Laws are even on the verge of this. You are still you're competing on a worldwide stage with the best that there are, but you're still hobbled by the resentment-based policies, and understandable to some degree when draconian measures have been forced top down from the CRTC onto these entrepreneurial stations who are just trying to sell advertising and make a living and pay all their people. It limits the business in a macro sense sometimes. So I think it's the last component that we need to address, at least from what I can see, in terrestrial radio and in terms of the disparity. And I think the way we do that is not just by making a case to folks like yourself, but it's also by continually providing a better product. You changed your opinion based on a pair of shows at the Belleville Theater, which I booked, by the way, back when I used to work with Johnny. Love that guy. And you saw the appeal, and you weren't the only one, by the way. We brought Johnny into Edmonton on the tour just after that one, and we sold 11,000 tickets. And I remember a lot of the stakeholders from Kissin' FM and CFCW being there going, there's more people here than there was for Toby Keith. Like Johnny Reed is doing something that we didn't know was possible. And it helped open up a new level of thinking and evaluating and consideration as it pertained to Canadian artists with its interface with Canadian radio. So I'm hoping that we can continue to produce more arena level stars that helps make the case and substantiates the case so that you guys go, you know what? At this point, there should be no Canadian distinction for power rotations and no American distinction. I'm hoping we get there.
Oh, it would be, and listen, I'm a radio programmer, and if I were, I could easily, I'm fortunate where we're independent, and so the buck stops here. I could do that, but I'm not. So, it's easy for me to sit here and say things, and it's a very, it's a long process. And I will say this too.
What's stopping you right now? Because I know where your heart is on this, and I know how passionate you are for these artists. So what's stopping you? Is it business? Is it selling it higher up the chain? Like, what is it?
Probably a little bit of everything. Because we have these ways we think in radio, and just the way kind of it's always been, and that habits are hard to break, right? And people can be tough to convince. So probably a little bit of everything. I also believe too, part of the challenge is we're so intrinsically tied to US culture. And that in many parts of the world is a challenge that those other artists globally don't face, and I've heard over time that radio regs in Australia, I don't even think they have like Australian content regs. They don't need them. But again, our neighbors to the south are such a cultural powerhouse. So the playing field's not the same globally, which, and that's why I say this is such a very difficult thing to move forward. There's been times in my database where I've had a position in my international heavy category always set aside for the best Canadian song at the time.
Yeah.
And, and so there are ways in a slow moving way to make things better. There are ways.
It's already moved a lot, like I said, I wanted to start this off not by grilling you on it, but by applauding you for the
Oh,
efforts that you
happy to
put
have the
in personally to
conversation.
make sure, but to make sure that we get more Canadian number ones and to continue to perpetuate our industry the way that you have. But to me, it seems like it's one of the last things we need to address. And you're a trailblazer and a guy who's always on the forefront and the frontier of things. So who knows? It would be amazing if we had someone to lead the charge on dropping that distinction at some point. But also, it's incumbent upon the industry to make sure that if we do that, it's not going to cost you revenue. It's not going to cost you your job. It's not going, we have to make sure we're churning out the products that are at a level that they compete on the international marketplace as well, if we're going to justify the support from the stakeholders in the business at radio. So it's definitely not a sole decision of yours. It's a multiple pronged effort.
And I will say this, I think, and I appreciate again, your kind words, and I applaud everybody at country radio who's helped make a difference. I'm one radio station on the panel, and I got to tell you, you know, as you described over the course of time, and we've seen more Canadians achieving the number ones, and we see the difference that can make for these artists. Some of my favorite times in this business have been dealing with some of my colleagues at radio and good friends all working together towards that goal. So I really want to make sure everybody who maybe happen to tune into this and still in at this point at radio, very well done, because
Yeah,
it's
it's
a community effort.
it is a community effort. I couldn't agree more. Something else that you brought up in our call prior to getting on the podcast, and I really liked what you had to say, is it dials back to your self awareness. You're a 46-year-old white
Ugly,
guy, yeah,
old,
and you're
bald.
and you're. I didn't say any of that. And you are working like, what demographic are you guys gunning to attract with your radio station? What's the target demographic, gender and age?
Well, I'll tell you this. I believe anybody with two working ears on their head should be listening to my radio station. That, when I wake up in the morning, is who I'm targeting. Anybody with ears, I want them tuned on to my station.
But your
However,
sales force, which is out there selling
okay,
advertising, who do they want? Who do they want? Who are they interested in attracting?
everybody wants the coveted female 25-54, you know, adults 25-54. And I understand I'm in that demographic, but I'm male, and statistics show most of the decision makers, statistically are females when it comes to household purchases and such, and that's why they're so desirable from an advertising standpoint. What am I? I'm male. I'm 46, so I'm in the demographic, but I'm getting near the top end.
You're at
And
the edge of
so,
it.
yeah, right
So
on the
how
edge.
how do you manage what might be considered your own personal bias as it pertains to music and programming decisions? You have a bit of a method that you go through, and I think it's important to talk about that.
I do. Thank you. I've been able to identify in the company those folks that I know aren't just people who work in radio. They are people who are music consumers, and there's a difference. There are some people, um, they open up this microphone, they'll say what they got to say, and then they turn it off and they turn the music volume down. And it's more about, you know, their role rather than the entire package. So I know who I have at my disposal who are real music consumers at my fingertips. And so when there's a situation where I've got a song and I'm not entirely sure um, where I land on it, I'm able to reach out to some of those folks, bring them into my office. I won't tell them who the artist is. I won't tell them anything about the song. Just tell me what you think of this, and I'll hit play and I'll get the raw, unfiltered feeling on it. And what I will do is call in that 2554 female, um, and not just, the same one all the time, because that's a broad spectrum, 2554. Tell me what you think of this and get their raw, unfiltered feedback. Because if I give them the artist name, I mean, they may recognize it in the voice, but if I give them the artist name prior to, you're predisposed. You're predisposed. So I'm able to recognize when I could use some more sets of ears. And
Yeah, it's smart to do that too, because you're right. We have a predisposed disposition. If someone tells you that they're going to take you to the new Steven Spielberg movie or the new Martin Scorsese movie, you have a certain expectation in your mind, and that's a totally different art form. But it's the same thing in music. Like certain artists, you establish a level of reverence for, and you're going to give them a bit of a leg up, or potentially it could work the opposite direction too. So I think that's smart. How much do you guys rely on testing or consultants to make programming decisions?
I've had mentors, probably a better descriptor for some of the folks who've been an influence on me and my programming stylings. But as independents, we're able to make our decisions for our reasons. And so, the answer is not terribly much on research, like formal research. And I'm not necessarily purely a chart guy, because people program their stations for different reasons, right? So not everything is created equal. So I've been really lucky over my time in the business to get to know a lot of colleagues in a similar role to mine. And I've gotten to know them well enough that I know, who does what, why they do it. And so sometimes in the case of breaking a tie where, I'm on the fence on something, I might go check what some of those trusted colleagues of mine are up to. And people who I believe run good operations, that their people have great ears for music. So rather than just, well, let's see what's going on the chart. No, no, no. Let me see who my buddy or what this person's up to, and what they're doing with this.
How much does streaming factor into those decisions? A lot of radio stations are really paying attention to Spotify and other streaming platforms to make programming decisions. What about you?
Um, we cannot stick our head in the sand and ignore that. And I mean that's obvious at this point. It's been interesting over the course of time as with the proliferation of streaming, because what happens is we often get data thrown at us, and you know what it is? They're all just large numbers. Oh, we got 800,000 streams and we got 1.5 over here, and it sounds like an auction. They're all just big numbers. So what I've started to
A
do,
yacht auction.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, over the course of time, because again, I never assume I'm the smartest guy in any conversation. What I'll do is I've reached out to folks going, okay, you tell me, because you're the person feeding me this data. You tell me what has your attention. Like, because, as streaming has grown in its usage, so does the measurement of what's good and what's not, with more people streaming more often. So it's also a moving target. So I don't know. I just get a lot of emails filled with a lot of big numbers. And
Right.
so, the challenge has been
So you're asking them to give you context most of the time. It's like, don't just give me a number. Tell me how this is performed versus all of the other singles you've released to this point, or tell me how it's performing versus our ads from last week. That
absolutely,
type of data. You're asking people
yes,
to take another step on analytics to help you really put a bit more of an idea and understanding around those numbers.
perfectly said, because otherwise it's just another massive number in an email.
I think that's a really good point. That's a really good point for trackers, who are or anybody who's promoting a single at radio, or any artist who's trying to get your attention. It's like, you know, this single is outperforming times 10 our highest streaming single of all time. That's going to get your attention.
Now
That's
it's got my
interesting.
attention.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Put the numbers into some form of context. Because again, as I said, otherwise it's just a another page full of data that I'm trying to, decipher. So, but it absolutely does. Like it does play a factor. It absolutely plays a factor, um, because again, I think if radio's going to maintain its real estate, then we can't ignore what our audience is telling us they're streaming.
Yeah, it's an interesting quandary, and I brought this up with other program directors and music directors because to me, being in the business for 20 years, radio was on the forefront, the vanguard, the frontier of selecting the emerging artists, or sorry, the emerging stars in the format. And now, to a degree, consciously or unconsciously, we have ceded that territory to streaming services to a degree, right? We have allowed them to tell us what's hot and followed suit. And it'll remain to be seen whether or not that has a long term effect on terrestrial radio or its relevance to the format. I'm not sure yet. I think it's a great data tool to have streams, but I miss the old days when you could get a renegade radio programmer to roll the dice on a song, create some momentum, create a story, and then take that nationally. There's something to be said for losing that.
I fully agree with you. That's of concern to me as well. Um, I hate, again, radio's the incumbent, and I hate giving up, conceding any position of strength. And to give you an example, you and I spoke about, my daughter, 17 years old. She's old enough now to not ignore her consumption habits. And there's been artists where she'll come to me and say, "Hey, Daddy, like, do you have the?" She doesn't call me Daddy anymore. She used to. Um, she'll bring up some new song from an artist, and I'm going, that's not on my desk yet, right? So that's of concern to me, Jim. And I also don't have the answer to that, in terms of what the future holds in that regard. But I would love to see an environment where radio was serviced a song at the same time. And it's not that it doesn't happen. I would just love it on an entirely consistent basis. That when a song goes out to the DSPs, it goes out to radio. At least give us the chance to be on that music discovery.
Well, that's a really good point because a lot of us in the industry have decided we need to substantiate a case to take a song to radio. So we have ceded your ability to break these songs to these streaming services. And then there's the TikTok factor now too, which is really interesting and really starting to move the needle, even in country music. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch this all play out in the next 5 years and see what role radio will continue to play moving forward. Thank God for now, it's still paramount. It's a major priority to Canadian country music artists, and I knew this would happen. I knew if we got on a call, it would an hour would fly by. So thanks for taking the time to do this today, and thanks again for all of your support and all of your work in moving our format forward and evolving it and giving artists more opportunities to be exemplified in our format as stars. It's been really rewarding working with you on that front.
And I would love to think, and I truly believe it, for our format, for our artists, the best is yet to come. And there are brighter days on the horizon very soon where you're going to be getting acts back out on the road. And that's what really gives me hope that, as I said, the best is yet to come. Congrats on 50 of these. And I got to tell you, if you've stacked the order of these things in any sort of rough order of merit, I consider landing in the top 50 an incredible achievement. And I thank you.
I guarantee that's going to happen. I guarantee that can happen. Thanks again for doing this, man. Really good to see your face.
My pleasure, and yours the same.